Can you believe we're on the last module? You're almost done with English 1. Don't you feel proud of yourself? I hope you do. I'm going to talk today about your research paper. First, I'm going to give you some ideas for your research paper, and then I'll talk a teeny bit about the mechanics. So you're going to think that I'm talking about the history of the English language, because I will at first, but then I'll get into other things. So I really call this lecture Influences on the English Language. So the first influence on the English language is ? We don't know. Because we don't know everything about history, darn it. The original inhabitants of this tiny little island, the United Kingdom, were the Picts, P-I-C-T-S. And we really don't know enough about them for you to do research in the Santa Monica College Library. So don't do research on them. You could go to the UCLA library, but that's not necessary. The next influence were the Celts, C-E-L-T-S or K-E-L-T-S. And they came from Gaul, G-A-U-L, which is sort of present-day France. And they gave us words like Thames. You know, the first time you saw the Thames River printed, you probably thought you should pronounce it Thames like James, but it's pronounced unusually because it's from the Celtic language. And there is enough information in our Santa Monica College Library to write on that if you're interested. The next influence were the Romans. They came to get metals out of the ground and brought some Latin words to us. Latin entered English 5 different times. The Romans left us some practical words like pond for pontoon and things like this. The Scottish people were so wild that the Romans built a big wall across the top of, not the top, the middle of the United Kingdom to keep those Scottish people out. The next influence on the English language are the Saxons left one part of Germany, and then 100 years later, the Angles left another part of Germany, and we call it Anglo-Saxon. I don't know why it's out of order historically wise, but what happened to these Germans is they felt they were too close to their neighbors. They could see the smoke from their neighbors' fire. So it was time for them to move. They were mostly farmers and hunters. And they came and they gave us a lot of our practical words, almost all of our swear words and words for the farm animals and parts of the face and colors. So you probably can find a lot on that subject if you're interested. The next influence on the English language, the Vikings. Now, there's different groups of Vikings, and I'm not going to divide them up, but they traveled far and wide. As you know, they rediscovered America before Columbus rediscovered it. They went all the way down through Russia into Jerusalem. They went all the way down both the western side and the eastern side, the western side of the United Kingdom and the eastern side of France. And along the way, they established royal families. This didn't happen overnight, by the way. And they left us most of our SK words like skin and skull and ski. And they left us most of our TH pronouns like they, them, their. So they had a big influence on our language. Oh, and on their way to rediscover the Americas, they stopped by Iceland. And so the people in Iceland always thought that they were related to the Scandinavian countries. But what happened is Iceland had everybody in their country provide a DNA sample. And it turns out most of the people in Iceland are related to the Irish because the Vikings picked up Irish people on the way to Iceland. So the people in Iceland are culturally related to Scandinavian countries, but physically, they have a lot of Irish DNA. See all the weird things you can find when you study languages. So all this time, different groups of people were attacking this poor little island. And now things are changing. The big change happened in 1066. I'll tell you a story. It's a true story, but I have all the facts out. Once upon a time, a long time ago, in the little island country, there were two brothers, and they both wanted to be king. Well, one brother kicked the other brother off. So the other brother landed on the Normandy Peninsula in what is nowadays France. And that other brother and his relatives stayed there for 100 years. Now, you know that people didn't live that long in those days. So for those 100 years, they stayed there. They married French people. They took on the French religion. They took on the French language. But at the end of 100 years, they said, I am English, but they said it in French. I'd say it to you in French, but I don't speak French. So the politics in Europe at that time were such that the kings decided it was time to go back and take over this island of Britain. So they gave the English people, who were now in reality French people, enough money and troops, and they went over and they had the Battle of Hastings, which is outside of London, I think a little bit south. And now William the Conqueror was ruler. He beat out Harold the Saxon. This is another research paper topic. How do people get their last names? Because you don't call me Mary Jo the Professor. You know, I actually have a last name, I think. Anyway, that's an interesting topic. So now, everybody who wanted to be anybody in politics or in the court life, you know, that's the social life, had to learn to speak French. If you were a lawyer, you had to learn to speak Latin. And the Roman Catholic Church came at this time, which also brought Latin. So we call this the Norman Conquest more often than we call it the Battle of Hastings. And this changed everything, because now we had a huge vocabulary. We had words from Latin, words from French, and the Anglo-Saxon words. So this helps make English one of the richest in adjectives in the world. So now what happens? This island goes out and conquers other people around the world and bring in words from other countries. The British Empire brought lots of words back into English. And so you can find lots of research on some of these words that came back into English at this time. We have the kapok from Java. We have koala bear and kangaroo from Australia. We have buccaneer from Brazil. Now, I know people in Brazil speak Portuguese, but this came directly from Brazil. We have Gaelic, which is spoken in Ireland. We have bog and clan. From Iceland, we have berserk. That's what the male reindeers do when the female reindeers go into heat. We have chess from Persian. We have camel from Hebrew. We have from Turkey. We have vampire and yogurt. So I just named a few. You should be happy I only named a few. So then another influence on the English language is words from Native Americans. Think of all the place names here in Los Angeles that are named after Native Americans. Temescal Canyon. We have foods like succotash or moccasin. We have words from French explorers that came, prairie and chowder and gopher. We have lots of words that come from Native Americans. Another influence in the language, and now you can see I'm really moving away from history, are invented words. So we'll put two words together that are sounding Greek, so they sound very intellectual. So we'll get telegraph, telephone, automobile, or we have other made-up words like, wedgies. Now these are not what you're thinking. These are shoes that are wedges with a heel. Or smog, combination of fog and smoke. So you can do a research on invented words. We have words from famous people, all sorts of famous people, like pasteurized from Louis Pasteur, and Fahrenheit from, I forget who, forgive me, and bougainvillea from a Mexican general. There's lots and lots of information about words from famous people. The Earl Sandwich. You may have had a sandwich for lunch today. He was gambling and he was hungry. It's 3 o'clock in the morning, but you weren't allowed to bring food to the gaming tables because in those days food was cooked differently. So he went over to the buffet, French word, and stabbed his fork into a piece of meat and lifted up, and it was all bloody and drippy because that's why he cooked it. He took 2 pieces of bread to soak up the blood, and that's supposed to be the first sandwich. There's a book in the Santa Monica College Library that says the story I told you is true. Believe it or not, it doesn't matter. We have words from brand names. So we'll use the brand name instead of the real name. So if I'm asking you for your Q-tip, I might say, I'm really asking for a cotton swab. Or if I ask for a Kleenex, I'm asking for a tissue. Or if I'm asking for Scotch tape, I'm asking for cellophane tape. Or if I say Google it, I'm saying research it. We have a lot of words from brand names. So if I say Netflix, I could mean any streaming service. So there's a lot of research on brand names that you can find in our fabulous Santa Monica College Library. Another big influence on the English language is slang. Any time in the United States, we have about 10,000 slang words floating around. You and I don't know all of them, of course. And slang depends on the time in history. So the slang that Malcolm X spoke in Harlem is different than the slang spoken in Harlem today. And the slang in Los Angeles is different than the slang in New York today. The biggest creators of slang are teenagers and college students, the military, and sportscasters. So you could write a paper on your favorite sport, the slang in your favorite sport. You could just take the sports section of the LA Times and use that for a little basic research for the body of your paper. Also, we have things that are specific to American English. We actually have a dialect, the Gula Dialect, G-U-L-L-A-H. It's spoken off the coastlines of South Carolina. To get a dialect, you need to be separated from people, either physically, like the islands off of South Carolina, or economically. So we use words from the Gula dialect. We use okra and juke for jukebox. Juke means to have a wild time. Now, there's lots of dialects in every language. So I think they're having a revival of the play My Fair Lady, where Professor Higgins takes a Cockney woman and tries to teach her to speak standard English. Although I find the term standard English somewhat prejudiced because her Cockney English was just fine, as far as I was concerned. It's just that there's different ways to communicate. Okay, another facet of slang that I will tell you about in the next video, because remember I told you I'm too cheap to pay for this, so I have to do another video. See you a little later.